Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell Classic Workshop. This time round we're looking at the Ferrari Testarossa and getting up close and personal with a few things that are sort of more anecdotal of my experience of working on them for the last 40 years, more than the sort of thing that you'd find on Wikipedia, hopefully. It's funny that, you know, the cars are like buses and policemen. We either have none here or we have two or three of a particular make and model. It happens all the time. It's really extraordinary. And we happen to have two Testarossas in the workshop at the moment, so it is just one of those things. But as ever, we just make the videos as they present themselves and as the cars come along. This is a very early one. It's the Monospecchio, as it's called. Retrospectively, almost, it garnered that name, meaning single mirror, which, as you can see, is placed halfway up the A-post so that people can see supposedly over these rear haunches, although it didn't stop Ferrari later, particularly for the US market, the very lucrative US market, moving the mirrors to a more conventional position and bringing in a second one for overtaking maneuvers, or people overtaking you, which presumably didn't happen very often in a Testarossa if you were a self-respecting Testarossa driver, such as Don Johnson. I have to mention that, of course, being a Testarossa. I've always liked these, I have to say. There's something about them I quite like. I mean, they're full of 1980s excess. You've got these massive strakes going on at the sides, and they are incredibly wide. They're 2 meters wide. They're 6 foot 4 inches, I think it is, wide. So that makes them wider than a Lamborghini Countach, which we have here. Several examples of with the wider flared arches that most of them had, apart from the very first series. And they're actually even wider than a Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit or Bentley Turbo R from the same years. Just absorb that for a moment. So this meant this was an extremely wide car for its time, bearing in mind cars have grown generally since the 1980s. That means that it's not a B-road hustler, as we would say in the UK. It's not something you can throw down a B-road, a sort of windy, off the highway road in the UK. But nevertheless, they have a charm. I actually love the way these sound, strangely enough. The engine is, when it's firing on all 12 cylinders, which this one wasn't when it came in, they are quite a sweet sounding engine. They're just something lovely about them. They're not noisy. The exhaust is incredibly quiet, standard, and it's got a plethora of back boxes on it to make that happen. It's still a very sweet sounding car. The engine is a flat 12, of course, and which means you've got two banks of 6 cylinders literally opposite each other, not in a V, but 180 degree V12 or a flat 12. And it's, as ever, called a boxer engine because the pistons actually consecutively fly in and out to get towards each other or away from each other in the engine. And one of the first racing boxer engines was built by Alfa Romeo in 1939. So it's a long time ago. That was a fabulous bit of kit. That was a 1.3 litre engine, supercharged, and it developed 335 brake horsepower, I think, at about 8,500 revs. Quite a bit of kit for the 1930s. And then, of course, things went pear-shaped in 1939, and the engine was actually far more competitive than the chassis in that Alfa Romeo's case, so that was a bit of a cul-de-sac. Ferrari first tried the flat 12 engine in a racing car in 1964 at Watkins Glen in the US. That was its debut, and as they say, the rest is history. All those magnificent Formula One cars from the 1970s, the 312Ts, some of my favourites, as driven by Clay Regazzoni and Niki Lauda. Can't remember, I think it was the T2. And I have often gone to the Monaco Historic Grand Prix over the last number of years, and to hear those Ferrari flat 12s on open megaphone exhausts, as opposed to, there's nothing wrong with the sound of a Cosworth DFV V8, but there's something incredibly musical, and you can hear the harmonics working in the exhaust system on a flat 12 Ferrari of that era racing car. We've actually devised various more noisy exhaust systems over the years here, more for Berlinetta boxers than Testarossas. And there are various ones available, Capristo, Tubi, etc., where you just bolt on extra noise, basically, and hopefully a little less back pressure. We experimented quite a bit with the 365 Boxer, the first production Ferrari flat 12 car, which was around from 1974, I think, to 77, something like that. And that was far more leery than this car. That was actually almost as powerful, if not as powerful, but it was a bit more of a handful. This is, as a driver's car, this is tamed down quite considerably, and Ferrari had all sorts of creature comforts like space and room for luggage, and in fact this car has got the factory available Schedoni luggage kit with it, which is absolutely beautiful, tailor-made for the Testarossa. Just lovely. The engine itself is a horizontally opposed flat 12. We've done a lot of work on this car. The engine's been out, which the whole thing comes out, is unpluggable on a cradle from the back of the very antiquated 1940s and 50s chassis, essentially. And the reason that the engine is so removable is it's Ferrari's way of saying, we're terribly sorry you can't change the cam belts with the engine in situ, because they're right at the front. Right next to this bulkhead, so we'll try and make it as easy as possible for you to remove the engine so that you can get at the cam belts at the front and change them. And when these were first launched, you had to do this particular piece of work every 2 years. And due to various improvements in belt technology and improvements in tensioners, depending on who you speak to, that has increased from 3 to 5 year belt change intervals. Ferrari used to have a technical hotline that you could call. Certain people who were privy, dealers and occasionally in Tyrrell, for whatever reason, could get through to these people. And they told me that Ferrari's reason for the cam belts lasting only 2 years was, ... wait for it, ozone from the alternator stator windings affecting the cam belt rubber. There you go, that's what they said. I would not presume to question that in any way, shape or form whatsoever. So we'll move on. The engine is located quite high in the car, and the reason for that is that it's simply, it's mounted over the gearbox. So you've got this flat 12 engine, as I say, quite high with the gearbox underneath it, and a set of transfer gears at the back of the engine just by the exhaust system. And that's okay. It means that lengthwise it's not too long because it's one on top of the other, but it does mean that the weight distribution is rather high at the center of gravity, because the engine is actually mounted quite high in the car's frame, of necessity because the transmission's underneath it. And that high C of G undoubtedly makes a difference to the way the car handles. It's Ferrari have done their best to cope with it and to obviate the effects, but it was particularly noticeable in 365 Boxers. As I say, they were a leery car. We actually look after a few 365 Boxers, so we will be doing a video on one of those very soon. The engine is a 4-cam, 48 valve flat 12. It uses the round tappet shims, the same type that I think the first Ferrari to use those was the 275 GTB4, the second series of those in 1967. 1968, they went on to these shim type tappets, and they were actually used by Fiat. They were a Fiat part. Ferrari designated their own cam profile, which is very similar to the earlier flat 12 engines cam profiles. Not the same because of exhaust emission reasons. They actually tamed down the cam lobes, the profiles slightly, to make the engine burn more cleanly and a little less powerfully. But they did introduce 4 valves per cylinder on this engine, so that means we've got a total of 48 valve clearances or tappets to adjust on this engine. As I say, it uses the shim in bucket type setup, which I covered adjusting that in a previous video some time ago with a Ferrari 246 GTS Dino, a black one, beautiful car. So you have to laboriously hand set all these 48 valve clearances in order to set the valve clearances right. and they have to be right, otherwise you have all sorts of problems, clattering noises or whatever. But the interesting thing is, a lot of manufacturers by this time, Ferrari and Lamborghini excluded, and Porsche, I think, largely, but a lot of the rest went on to hydraulic tappets, as they're called, which take up the clearance. So you have no running clearance at all, no matter where the camshaft is rotating. Even on the base circle, as it's called, when everything's asleep and the valve is closed, you don't have a clearance, and that makes things super quiet. But the problem is, Ferrari couldn't develop a hydraulic tappet due to cost reasons and various other things that would actually do the job as well as the old shim and bucket system. And in fact, the first Ferrari, I think, to have hydraulic tappets was the 355 in 1995. Ferrari got that licked, and that they really did, because those engines can rev to 9,000 if they're just tweaked slightly, and they sound great, and the hydraulic tappets work beautifully. One of the things about this engine, one of the things I've discovered over the years, this is a bit of a tip for any budding Testarossa owners who fancy taking their engine out and lifting it off the transmission. There is an oil feed port in the mating face between the top of the gearbox and the bottom of the engine. And it doesn't matter whether they're wet or dry sump lubrication, they all have this issue. And what can happen is, if you use normal silicon sealant on the mating face around this particular tube, this pickup pipe, it can actually block the pickup pipe, and you run out of oil pressure on the engine because the galleries get blocked. And there is a particular product, I think from memory, I haven't done any research before the video, I'm digging very deep into my memory. I think it's called Loctite 501, but it's a oil soluble vulcanizing sealant. So it will seal the outside, and I think from memory, again digging deep, there's an O-ring in there, the rubber O-ring to help. But if you use the right stuff, this particular Loctite product, I haven't got shares in Loctite, it actually is designed to dissolve in the hot engine oil, but it's not designed to not work around the outside. Very clever, whizzy chemical technology. But if you get the sealant wrong, you risk blowing up the entire engine. And I've seen several maladies with Testarossas over the years. I remember I looked after one in the 80s, which was a lovely car, a blue metallic one, but one cylinder head, the bearings suddenly seized up on it because whoever had done work on the engine had actually used the wrong sealant. So it's a big deal. Les has, we've done a sort of restoration job on the visual aspect of the engine and gearbox within reason. We've taken the cam covers off, we've put new seals in those, new gaskets, we've blasted them, repainted them, so it's all looking lovely. It's very funny because Ferrari have made a modification to the ignition system as well. The very first cars, the ignition systems, the HT leads plugged vertically into an ignition coil either side of the engine compartment. And it's not good engineering practice to have things mounted vertically because of whether it's bolts or ignition leads or anything else, because obviously over time they can work themselves loose and fall out. And I remember on one occasion, I think it was about 1991, I got a frantic phone call from a customer in Liverpool, in a very undesirable, at that time, part of Liverpool 8, Tocky or Toxteth. And he was panicking like mad. He was saying, my Testarossa, this was very first mobile phone days, or reasonably, my Testarossa's broken down in Toxteth. I'm having loads of people circling me like vultures. What do I do? So eventually he phoned, a buddy came along who wasn't too far away. They lashed a rope on the front end and got the Testarossa out of Toxteth and actually wrecked the whole front end of the car by lashing a rope around the wrong place. He wasn't bothered. He was bothered about rather more than the front bumper. But what had happened is one of the ignition coil leads had fallen out, so it took me 30 seconds to fix it when they got it back to the workshop. But I noticed Ferrari have, on later cars, they actually incorporated an anti-gravity clip to stop that happening again. Obviously mine wasn't an isolated case. So what I'm doing now, I'm not happy with the fuel injection system on this bank. So we're going to adjust the mixture, but it's very fiddly to get at. It's this bank that's causing the problem. I'm just going to see if we can unscrew it and make it a bit richer. Just a tiny, tiny smidgen. No. That's it, you're on it. Oh. The problem is the screws take a set over the years. That's it.
Yeah, the magnets come off.
It's all right. Ah, brilliant. Now what I'm going to do, I know from experience whether these are weak or rich by covering the hole over. Yeah, it's a tiny bit weak, but not very much. So we'll just put the key in there. There we are, that's in, that's located now. Right, we'll try that. Is that better? It feels better. Just, yeah, I'm happy with that. There we are, so we've just adjusted the CO slightly. It was weak on one bank, and I know from experience if I take the screw out of the adjustment hole, the rev should drop maybe 50 RPM as they were doing. So I've now just taken it so they've dropped a little bit less than that, and that has evened it out beautifully. Evened it out really nicely. I'm very happy with that. So there's a lot I like about these cars, there really is. Yeah, let's take it for a run. Well, here we are at Trattoria Testarossa, and I think these are one of the cars that's grown on me over the years. I always found them a bit effete compared to the likes of a Countach, but probably because I'm older than I was. I actually quite like them now. I mean, it's amazing considering how the Porsche 911 Turbo and the Countach Quattrovalvole, which sort of overlapped with this car, came out, or I guess it was the 959 or the 288 GTO, but they weren't really rivals. They're also different, the Countach, the Porsche and this. I mean, the Countach is for thrills and spills and adrenaline. It's fantastic, particularly with the later Quattrovalvole engine. But this is a highly civilized place to be. I mean, it's obviously still got plenty of grunt. It is, after all, a 180 mile an hour car, a genuine 180 mile an hour car. But it's the ride is quite choppy, and I suspect it's probably choppier than it should be. I don't remember Testarossas being as choppy as this. I suspect the dampers are slightly seized, which is not unusual, actually. Koni, not because of any quality issues, just through lack of use. They do tend to not get warm very often and actually work. I suspect it will smooth out as we get some miles on it. But this car's got the brown dashboard, which I remember you could either have brown or black. And I think this is the Crema interior, as opposed to the ubiquitous and extremely in-your-face Magnolia, which red with mag was the colour to have a Testarossa in the UK. I don't think the Germans liked Magnolia, actually. I think most of them were black that went there. But and also it doesn't feel ridiculously wide, because cars, even a modest hatchback, is massively bigger than it used to be. So yeah, We'll just warm it through and see if it comes to life. And the other thing is, in the 80s, there was the horsepower race between Ferrari and Lamborghini, as there always was between car manufacturers. They always wanted to outspeed, out-accelerate and out-horsepower each other. And this has a very flat torque curve for an engine of this era. I mean, it's red-lined at 6,800 RPM, which is very pedestrian for a Ferrari engine. It produces, according to Ferrari, 385 brake horsepower, which is not actually that much more than the 365 Boxer from 10 years before. But it's the mid-range torque and the drivability. This Bosch K-Egetronic 2 6-cylinder systems on this engine, as they were all equipped with before the later 512 TR and M went for electronic. But it works very well, and it makes them very tractable. Yeah, the suspension is smoothing out a bit now. It's so funny when I look in the side mirror. Although the cabin is not particularly narrow, the reason for the car's width is because of the flanks, which is essentially wasted space to some extent. You've got about 15 centimeters, 6 inches of wasted space either side of the cabin in terms of people room. Obviously you've got infrastructure, you've got things going on underneath there, but it's quite funny. But I just love the sound of these. It's not quantity, it's quality. That's how I would describe it. This is running a stock exhaust system without catalysts in the UK, and it's just an expensive sounding noise. Here we are, just driving along at sort of 1500 RPM-ish, something like that, and it just doesn't feel as though it's about to start oiling plugs up or being in any way unhappy. It's just this is what makes them so tractable and so drivable. No power steering, but the power steering is, by 1980 standards, is not that heavy actually. Parking speeds and manoeuvring round, yes, it is a bit heavy, but it's not that bad. It could be a lot worse. I'm sure modern car drivers, if they got into this, would be absolutely horrified to discover how heavy the steering is. But for me, it's absolutely not a problem, and I certainly wouldn't consider fitting a modern electronic power steering system to it, very good as they are. But yeah. And the other interesting thing is, because Ferrari engineered the suspension so well, you've got the twin coil-over spring damper units either side of the car at the back. You're not aware of that particularly high centre of gravity under normal road driving conditions. And let's face it, that's where this car was designed to spend its life, not tanking around a track on the door handles. So although I have to say this mirror actually restricts visibility when I was pulling up to the roundabout there, it's actually worse than a very thick A-pillar for somebody of my height. But nevertheless, why would you want to see out of a 180 mile an hour, 385 brake horsepower car coming up to a junction? Really? Oh yes, just opening the taps slightly. Because this engine is so tractable and the power curve is so smooth, it literally lifts the front of the car as you accelerate. There's just so much torque, it pulls the whole weight of the car up at the front. It's not dipping at the back, it's lifting at the front. That is quite an achievement. Daytonas do the same thing, although they're more squatting at the back. The other thing is the throttle's not unduly heavy. You're only opening 2 throttles on this. On a Countach, certainly on the original Quattrovalvole Countach, the downdraft as it's called now, such as Harry's we did, recently, Harry's Countach, you're opening 12 throttle butterflies when you press the throttle, and you know it. It's heavy, it's sticky, it's a bit compromised in right-hand drive cars because the cable routing and the mechanism is a bit more complicated. But in this, you're only opening 2 throttles, and it does make it much easier to control. It's a very well-developed package, this car. In as much as I can on a public road, I'm going to open up the taps shortly and just see if that flat 12 is ready to sing, as I suspect it is. We've got all the T's and P's, the temperatures and pressures are right. I'm not pushing this car too hard because the tyres for certain Testarossas are not easy to get hold of. The earliest cars like this had the knock-on wheel with the big central nut on each corner, and they had Michelin TRX tyres, big knobbly tyres, metric dimensions, 415 millimeters wheel diameter, and they actually, I wasn't a great lover of the TRX. They were fitted to Highline Citroen CX's, BMW 7 Series, I remember, these, various other cars, and they were quite noisy. In certain cases, you actually thought there was a noisy wheel bearing on that corner of the car, but it wasn't, it was just noisy tyres. Anyway, time to give this a little bit of you-know-what. Oh yes, just a creamy, smooth delivery of torque, mid-range torque. It's not about histrionics, this car, in spite of its racing pedigree, probably one of the richest racing pedigrees in the world. It's not about that. This is about crushing continents. It's about driving from Monaco to London in a day. It's yeah, and for that, the engine is beautifully tame and potent is the word I would use. Yeah, you can tell that Ferrari actually poured a lot of research and development into this car. And let us not forget, they made 7,200 of these. That's a huge number. I think Lamborghini made 10% of that in terms of the Countach, its contemporary Countach anniversary. Okay, they made these up until well into the 90s, but even so, it's a big number. I'm going to knock it down to first and just let's see what we have. That's 3,000 RPM. This is still a fast car, make no mistake. For all its civility and leather and fairly refined engine, very refined engine, this is still a fast car. And in spite of those small calipers, the brakes work, although I suspect not as nowhere near with the stamina of modern brakes stopping this size and weight and performance of car. But I think the Testarossa's time is coming. It's been a sort of underdog for years, really, and they're still not massively valuable at all compared to other Ferraris. One of these is sort of around about a third of the price of a Boxer, something like that, which was the immediate model before. So yeah, a lot of car for the money. I just have to open it up again. Oh, great. A very exhilarating car. It's a Jekyll and Hyde, this car. It really is, more than most. Just deliciously creamy, instant, punchy, push you in the seat throttle response when needed, but But happy to, in fact, I'm going to, just to prove a point, take this down to 1,000 RPM. So just above idle speed. And there we are. Instant shove in the back from 1,000 RPM. That's what your money's paying for. Not high revs, not craziness. And this is by Ferrari standards, this engine is as bulletproof as it ever got in a road car, because they made a very important technical change when they brought this car out, and that was changing the exhaust valves from sodium cooled, hollow stemmed, which were a sort of failure waiting to happen, dare I say it, to exhaust valves made of Nymonic 80, an aerospace material, and that made the world of difference because it immediately got rid of a potential huge mechanical failure inside the engine. So these will actually do higher mileages than a lot of previous Ferrari V12s. He says, indulging himself. Whoa. Yes. This is such an underrated car. Such an underrated car. Fantastic. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell Classic Workshop video. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we will be back with something else very soon.